During the Second World War, as the Allies and the Red Army pushed the Germans back towards their homeland, they came across a number of different concentration camps. Here the true horrors of the Holocaust had been played out at huge complexes such as Auschwitz or Bergen-Belsen. The camps saw horrific executions and murders of thousands of innocent people, who the Nazis wanted to rid Europe of, and it was the SS who were the main perpetrators of the crimes. Many of the people responsible prior to the Second World War lived relatively normal lives, but under the guise of the conflict they seemed to relish in the mass murder and horrendous suffering of other people. One man who thrived inside the concentration camp system was Wilhelm Dörr, a young man who at just the age of 24 would meet the hangman's noose for his horrific crimes. So join us today as we look at the justified execution of Wilhelm Dörr, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Wilhelm Dörr was born on the 9th of February 1921 in Hesse, a small town, and was raised on a farm where he worked as a labourer. As the Nazis rose to power, they imposed a number of youth groups onto Germany for the young people inside of the country to join. For boys, they joined the Hitler Youth, an organisation which sought to train boys to become soldiers one day, and it was this what Dörr joined, like millions across the country. Inside of the Hitler Youth he thrived, but on the 15th of December 1940, shortly after the Second World War broke out, he applied to volunteer for the army, however instead was directed to become part of the Waffen-SS. The Wehrmacht rejected his service, and at the time in the conflict they were riding high on huge territorial gains of countries such as France, Poland, and they then turned their attention later east to the Soviet Union and the Balkans. Dörr then began training to become a combat engineer, someone tasked with fixing down broken military vehicles. However, in October 1941, he became rather ill, suffering with rheumatism. Because of this, he was then forced into hospital, where he spent a few months, but when he recovered, he was then reassigned to a brutal group. He became part of the SS Tossenkopfverbände, or the SSTV. This was part of the SS known for the control and administration of the concentration camps, and they oversaw and perpetrated much of the Holocaust. Inside of Germany they oversaw camps such as Bergen-Belsen, and outside in Nazi-occupied territory they oversaw Auschwitz and many other camps. They were the group who were truly responsible in facilitating the Holocaust, organising huge deportations of Jews from countries straight to the death camps. The SSTV were also responsible for extermination camps and setting these up. These were camps with no other purpose but to murder innocent people within, and these were set up at sites such as Treblinka. When Wilhelm Dörr joined this, he was involved in the administration of the camps, and went on to travel to Sachsenhausen concentration camp, serving as a guard until December 1943. In January 1944, Wilhelm Dörr was transferred across to Mittelbau-Dora, where he worked as a block leader inside the main camp. He claimed this was the first time he had anything to do with any prisoners, and he claimed actually that when he was there at Dora, the prisoners were not overworked and underfed. He was appointed to become the deputy to Franz Stoffel, the commander who was in charge of the smaller Kleinbedungen camp, in September 1944. It was clear that Dörr sought promotion inside of a concentration camp system, and he was rewarded for his service. Whilst here he was allegedly involved in an incident involving prisoners who were hiding in the potato cellars. Dörr ordered 3 other prisoners to beat the 2 until they were dead, and despite denying this, it was proven that this did occur. He helped to manage around 620 prisoners who were involved in creating V2 ballistic missiles, and they forced these people to work very hard. However, Dörr was later convicted for his crimes and was sentenced to death for what occurred after he left Kleinbedungen. As the Allies advanced towards the camp, Dörr and Stoffel were ordered to evacuate the prisoners and to head further back towards German lines. With this, they force-marched 620 on a death march in horrific conditions. The prisoners were given very little food and rest, and were forced to walk 30 kilometres a day, many of them in bare feet, as they had no shoes, and many others had to walk in the wooden clogs given to them to prevent escape in the camp. The march was originally intended to reach a different area, but when it arrived one night at Großhalen, shooting took place. It was at the time a defensive position for the Waffen-SS, and Stoffel was told that his prisoners could not stay here despite the fact they had marched 36 kilometres that day. Dörr and Stoffel went away, then the Waffen-SS started firing shots in the air which caused a panic, and when they returned, there were around 8 bodies of prisoners lying at the side of the road. The condition of Dörr and Stoffel's death march was treacherous, and eventually they headed towards Bergen-Belsen, and it was claimed they had no idea where they were going. Prisoners who attempted to escape were shot in the back of the head when captured, as were those who were slowing down the march. When they arrived at Bergen-Belsen, around 30 prisoners had been killed, either by the SS guards or by the sheer exhaustion. Dörr and Stoffel's group arrived at Bergen-Belsen on the 11th of April 1945, and when they arrived they were met with a camp on its knees. Bergen-Belsen had for a number of months been greatly suffering with overcrowding as prisoners were sent there from the front lines, back towards Germany, and there was a horrific shortage of food inside the camp. This, along with huge outbreaks of disease such as typhoid fever, typhus and TB, caused a horrendous scene, with thousands of dead bodies lining the camp's walls, with around 60,000 prisoners just starving and suffering. The British forces liberated the camp 4 days after the death march arrived, after an agreement was made with Heinrich Himmler to hand over the camp without any bloodshed. Following this, the British then put the SS personnel to work to bury the dead, and Wilhelm Dörr was forced to complete this work. He was then arrested for his crimes by the British military, and was brought to face justice, along with 45 other war criminals, including the Commandant of Belsen, Josef Kramer, and infamous guard Irma Grese at the Belsen Trials. Wilhelm Dörr was accused of crimes against humanity at Bergen-Belsen, and he pleaded not guilty. During his testimony and questioning, he was asked about the executions and murders that took place on the death march, along with the other camps he worked at. He maintained his innocence throughout, stating how he ensured prisoners were fed and looked after well, but this was clearly a lie, and it was seen through by the judges. Other witnesses testified that during the death march, there were prisoners who were executed in cold blood, and ultimately, along with Franz Stoffel, Wilhelm Dörr was responsible for this, as he was almost acting as the deputy leader of the march. He said prisoners received 500 grams of bread in the morning, cheese or sausages and margarine, and then sometimes bits of meat, before getting a hot meal in the evening, but this wasn't the case. It was also alleged that Dörr himself had shot 13 or 14 prisoners because they had bad feet or had diseases that meant they could not carry on. It was claimed also that they covered 51 kilometres on the first day, and on the first day he shot one man, before later shooting another couple in some woods. He could not clearly account for around the 30 prisoners that they had lost. Following his testimony, Wilhelm Dörr, despite only being 24, was sentenced to death for his crimes. It was clear that he treated the prisoners on the death march horrifically, and the judges deemed it to be true that he murdered a number of prisoners in cold blood. After being condemned to death, he was held in Hamelin Prison to await his execution, which came on the 13th of December 1945. Along with the other condemned to death following the Belsen Trials, he was held in a row of cells, and at the end of the row was an execution chamber that was being set up by the British military. Inside the chamber, a gallows had been created with a simultaneous drop for British executioner Albert Pierrepoint to conduct his work. Pierrepoint and his assistant met with all the condemned, including Dörr, to work out their height and weight, and then the drop needed to snap their necks and kill them instantly. On the 13th of December 1945, the women who were condemned were executed first by Pierrepoint, using the simultaneous drop, before the men took their place on the gallows. Wilhelm Dörr was taken from his cell to the execution chamber by 2 guards who then escorted him up the stairs, as his arms and legs were tied. Pierrepoint then placed a black hood over his head, along with the noose, before he shuffled Dörr over a chalk X he had drawn on the floor, above the trapdoor. Almost as instantly as he was placed on the X, Pierrepoint pulled the lever, and Dörr was executed. He was just 24 when he faced the executioner. Wilhelm Dörr was not the only young person who seemed to thrive inside the barbaric concentration camp system. Many of the SS guards were younger and had been brainwashed by the political and ideology of the Nazis from a young age, and Dörr was one of these. He was a brutal man who seemed to relish the power he possessed over those, and during the death march he demonstrated the worst evils of humanity, murdering in cold blood. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, And once again, thank you so much for watching.